Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Has more than 40 years experience as a teacher, researcher, writer, organizer, and consultant in the fields of ecology, environment, public health, water, sanitation, community development, international and humanitarian efforts. He is a pioneer in recognizing, explaining, and addressing the plight of environmental refugees and the need to restore damaged homelands. Beginning in the 1970s in the United States and then also overseas from the early 1990s. He has assisted and advised organizations in individuals affected and alarmed by the frequency and magnitude of environmental uprooting and the lack of effective response. He sees environmental refugees both as victims of a distinct kind of persecution and also as refugees, as bio-indicators of environmental emergencies. Beginning with the first Gulf War in 1992, he has been concerned about the fate of the people and environment of the marshlands. He has worked with Iraqi, American, and European scientists and humanitarians. In 1996, he organized a symposium that drew attention to the plight of marshlands. In 2004, he co-authored Twilight People, Iraq's Marsh Inhabitants. Then he created and taught an original online course on the restoration of the marshlands of southern Iraq at the 3 universities over several semesters. Currently, he is updating the course to include the era 2004-2014. Please give a warm welcome to the researcher, Mr. Stuart Leiderman.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, and my friends who have arranged for an invitation for me to come. This is my first time at the Iraqi Center. I spent a little time reading up on the internet about the opening of it 4 years ago and other activities that have been here. I think this is terrific. I'm a native from Washington, D.C. I grew up here. I know this area quite well. My father had some of his accounting clients who had little restaurants and places up and down Connecticut Avenue. He would used to take me on his rounds when he went to deliver the books and pick up records. So this area is very familiar to me. Then we moved out to Silver Spring. I graduated high school here and then went away to college and haven't lived back here. But when I come back, I really like Washington, D.C. It's a small city to me, and my family, having grown up here as well, it's good to be back here again and to know that the Iraqi Center. If I can do anything as a result of the program or discussion tonight or other interests, if I can do something to help the center, just let me know. This is wonderful publicity. This makes it look like there's an important person there, but really it's
indeed you are an important person.
It's the issue, and to be here on a Good Friday night means I can stay over the weekend and have happy Father's Day with my father, who's living here. He's 96, and he takes an interest in the things that I've been doing, even though they've been very strange over the years. So thank you again very much. And what I'll do is I'd like to, in my presentation, not knowing the audience and what your experiences and interest is, what I decided to do was put some things in there that probably many of you already know about, maybe some that you don't know about, but especially to try to convey that if you didn't know me before, it's a way for me to tell you and explain to you that I care about what this is all about, the people and the environment. And there are not nearly enough people who care about this. This is one of the world's worst kept secrets. And there needs to be much, much more understanding, attention. This is a terrible and a potentially wonderful case. There are many others in the world. And one of my motivations for doing this is to bring my knowledge up to date, because for the last several years I've been more involved in Haiti as a case of environmental refugees and ecological restoration. I was caught in the earthquake down there. We were doing disaster prevention research and we got caught. So over a period of time, I've been trying to get back to the subject of Iraq and southern Iraq and the environment. So this has given me an opportunity to bring up to date, and I'm sure some of you, can add a lot to that. So here on a borrowed computer, we have my story, and I'm wondering, do you want to keep the lights on? Is that all right? It's fine for me. Okay. First, I want to acknowledge some people who have really been a terrific help over the years to me around this subject, and you may know some of them. Dr. Ahmed Faisal, he's here. He's a good buddy of mine who's been here in the U.S. for a few years now. A wonderful, qualified scientist and a terrific person who made the introduction so that I could be here, and the follow-up from the embassy and the Iraqi Center. Rand al-Rahim, she was the founder, probably with a few others, of the Iraq Foundation here in Washington, D.C. And I owe a lot to her because she was one of the first people who sympathized with the message I was trying to make, which was to combine the environmental and the humanitarian sides together to get that story out. And we met, and it's almost 20 years ago, and we made a major science conference on this. And we've been in touch ever since. Nadim Kazmi is from England. He has been a major diplomatic and educational person with the Al-Khoei Foundation. Mostly they're in England. He and I are like brothers, and we've been through this thick and thin. It was his organization that helped fund and promote the BBC documentary. I'll show a little clip of it later on. That originally aired in 1993 in Britain, and then with a little American addition to it here in 1994. That was only played on Baltimore public television, nowhere else in the country. And that's the first time I saw that. It changed my course of my research and studies and interest. And so I owe a lot to him. We've worked together for a number of years and published together. Michael Wood and Rebecca Dobbs were the producers of that film. It was originally called Saddam's Killing Fields. And then the American version was renamed Saddam's Latest War. Salim Ali is a professor at the University of Vermont who was the one that both encouraged me and permitted me to create the course that I began to teach online about this subject. And they have a wonderful environmental studies program. Ahmed I met him for the first time in Toledo, Spain, when we were teaching this subject to a special session of the University of the Middle East. That summer program, they're based in Boston, the summer program they had that year in Toledo, medieval city, a wonderful place, and it was at a law school there. Dr. Ahmed was teaching at Halton College in England, and he's been almost full-time in a very high advisory position in education and science in Iraq for several years now. Michelle Stevens is a wonderful friend in California. If I could have arranged for her to be here tonight, she's a straight-ahead environmentalist, ecological restoration specialist, and has, you'll see, has created her own movement for the marshlands and the people from where she teaches out in California. Azam Awash may be familiar as a name and as a person to all of you. He also was from California, and he's Iraqi American, has a family in California. He left his engineering firm and went back to work on this subject in Iraq, almost full-time now for all these years. And we've worked together, and we've met together and spoken together as far and wide. If there was anyone that I could say was the Jacques Cousteau of the marshlands, I would say that he qualifies, and recently won last year the Goldman Environmental Prize for his work. And I have a little bit, and there's a terrific interview with him on the video I want to play from 60 Minutes coverage from 2009. Hassan Parto is Iraqi remote sensing specialist in Geneva, Switzerland, with the UN Environmental Program. The major, if you look at the cast of characters, it's very interesting since this subject and the crisis came to light and people have tried to do something about it. When the United States went back to Iraq in 2003, it was like a year later that the Iraq Foundation and several of us worked together to petition the State Department to give a look and some attention to restoring the marshlands. They were able to lobby through $4 million from USAID to send a number of field scientists over to Iraq for a period of time, and then to begin to launch sort of a framework for restoration. At the same time, the United Nations Environment Program, based in Geneva, decided the UN should do something about this as well. And fairly much separate, although some of you may want to correct me, fairly much separate from the United States effort, brought the Canadians and the Japanese and the Italians together to fund research and pilot programs. And they sort of went together in a kind of a parallel fashion. To me, it's still a mystery how they've coordinated or even looked at each other very much over the years. And out of this, if I have only one recommendation to make that all of you could help on, is on this subject, there really needs to be an annual summit where all of the characters, the whole cast of characters, not just Iraqi, but international, foreign as well, because this is a global effort. They need to come together. There's been too much individual development of relatively narrow interest kinds of things that I believe are simply not well coordinated, not understood, and not supported enough by others worldwide to be able to counter the opposing effects that are happening in the Middle East and in southern Iraq in particular. This is not just a matter of tribes, it's a matter of water, it's a matter of oil development, it's a matter of all the opposing factors. And so that's going to be one of my major recommendations about that. Hassan, by the way, he was the remote sensing specialist that has provided us over the years with the imagery from the United Nations of the changes that have happened there, both going into the era of through the 1990s and then into the past 2000. And John Carroll has been for many years advisor in environmental work at the University of New Hampshire, a good friend, and we worked together, and he was one of the people that first introduced me to that the subject of environmental refugees could be viable. Now, today's news, the USA Today, big editorial, Iraq exposes failed U.S. policy, our view. Bush and Obama have basically made things worse. Out of that whole editorial, there was one line there that jumped out at me. Before George W. Bush's 2000 invasion, there was no terrorist present in Iraq. This is an example of absolute ignorance about the story that we're telling. The story that we're telling is the story of terrorism in Iraq without any other interpretation. Memories are short, sound bites are short, policies are made based on preconceptions and assumptions that very often are extremely faulty and will lead to exactly the opposite effects that we want to have. Also, from this week's news, if you can see this, this is the conventional picture of so-called Fertile Crescent that we all grew up on and learned in school. And when I looked at the Wall Street Journal yesterday morning, I saw this drawing, and I said to myself, oh my gosh, an old picture of the Fertile Crescent. No, it's not. This is a picture of what I'm going to call the hostile crescent. And I want to say that my gut feeling and my reaction to this is that there's a connection between the notion of the empire that was described when people talked about the Fertile Crescent. And it's not by coincidence that the green shaded area looks so much like it is an area that's now extremely troubled in the middle of strife. To bring this back to Washington, D.C., I just want to make a suggestion. Here's a map with the red dot of the Iraqi Cultural Center. If you take your finger and you come down Connecticut Avenue to DuPont Circle, and then you go out Massachusetts Avenue to American University, I maintain there's another crescent there. And if you come down all the way Connecticut Avenue and across to K Street, there's yet another crescent. This is the kind of fertile crescent that I see when I look at the map of where the Iraqi center is located and the possibilities that you have to have some kind of an effect in the same way that in the old days they showed us pictures of another crescent somewhere else that did wonderful things. In the sense of organizing around international issues, not only is Washington, D.C. strategically important, but that red dot where the cultural center is right here gives you two more crescents that can be worked right here if you, in the same way. Now, this is from space. This, in the red circle, is southern Iraq. Above it is space. This is forgotten over and over and over again, this perspective. We didn't always have it because it's only been 30 or 40 years that we've been able to look at life this way. But to me, this is where the change and the potential of what we all aspire to comes from. We're here by the grace of God. Whether it's, no matter what religion you're from, what politics you have, what country you were born in, this is the earth, that's space. We're here not even of our own choosing. And we are so small. But when we damage it, we are seldom able to repair the damages. This is what we're up against. And the story of southern Iraq particularly has to do with a very small period of time when a huge amount of damage was done after a record of thousands of years. Floods, wars, other kinds of things had their effect, I'm sure, but they didn't take the toll that approximately 10 years of a very few number of people had, because they forgot who put them on the earth and where they came from. And this is a missing link in anything that we aspire to when we talk about the environment and we talk about human life and the quality of life on earth. Now, I'd like to play this clip. Let's see. And it's relatively recent. This is from 2009, and the production value is extremely good, and it's relatively short. So some of you may have seen this, some maybe not.
It turns out,
we are now officially inside the marsh. Oh. And you can see the reeds getting denser and denser, taller and taller.
Azam Alwash grew up in the water world that the Greeks named Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers. I got to tell you, this is not like any part of Iraq I've ever seen before.
Right? I mean, when you say Iraq, it's a desert, right? It's burning oil. Hey, it's magical is what it is. This is magic.
It's been more than 30 years since he pushed through the reeds with his father, who ran the irrigation office here.
So I have very warm memories of this place.
In 1978, Alwash left to study in America and became a partner in an engineering firm.
I achieved the American dream, Scott.
You'd been living in the United States for 25 years. You were an American citizen. You married an American woman.
Yes.
Your children are as American as they can be.
And I'm as American as can be.
Why did you imagine going back to Iraq after the life you had built?
I realized at some point in time that money and success and the American dream is not everything. Working on passion, on something that drives you, is everything.
Their villages are primitive. They weave a life out of the reeds of the marsh. They bind them into homes, feed them to their water buffalo, and burn them to bake their bread. Saddam tried to wipe out the marsh Arabs by destroying their world. He built 6 canals to divert the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates out into the desert and the Persian Gulf. In a 5-year project, he drained 90% of the marshes, an area of more than 3,000 square miles.
Okay, that sort of encapsulates part of the story better than I could ever. Plus, it gives Azam Alwash a little seat here tonight, with my thanks to him. Now, of course, of the entire area that we're talking about 100 miles long or more, 50 miles more wide, what is depicted there is a very small portion of that. And what outrages me so often about these kinds of stories is the epitaph of a sort that's always appended to the ends of these stories, when the narrator says, of course, it will never again be like what it was. This is the cute National Geographic type of twist that we're always encountering every time that magazine comes in the mail. Of course, we're so sad that this way of life is disappearing. What I maintain is 10 years of destruction is in no way acceptable to 5,000 years of existence of a way of life, even if satellite transmitters are added, even if motorized ambulances on the water are added, even if there were schools and so on. So this is where I've carved out my niche, is to challenge that norm that at the end of these kinds of promising stories, they can be taken by somebody else and turned into, oh, it's wonderful what they're doing in that small spot, but of course, the rest of it we have to forget about. Well, if the rate of restoration in the world does not equal or exceed the rate of destruction in the world year by year, then the whole population of the earth has to live on a smaller and smaller piece of it, which I call the remainder Earth scenario. This is happening all over the world, not just in Iraq. If we permit parts of the world to be written off and become uninhabitable, the rest of us have to live on what's left. And if you draw that out too many years, it starts to be untenable. So this is where you'll find that I part company with a lot of the people who have been involved in this kind of thing, not just in southern Iraq, but in environmental restoration work all over the world. Now, before we break, just for a little bit for discussion and then to see where we might like to go next, what I did here was to compile, and I'll jump some of this, a few things just to briefly describe the place and the people and what we know from the evidence that's been gathered. Because very often international policy is made without a grip on these things at all. The first, I think, that's important is that at one point in time, southern Iraq was under the Persian Gulf, was under the ocean. And that habitation of what is now southern Iraq, habitation only was possible as the ocean receded thousands of years ago. And this is based on archaeological evidence and other things. That's the first thing. And that the meandering of the river, of the rainwater as it passed through that part of the world, the meandering of it was what permitted people to live in the different locations. And the meandering of that water caused countless villages and towns and cities. Here's some maps and some of the place names. And many of them were quite large years ago. A few views that I gathered on the Fertile Crescent concept that we all learned. When you say something is fertile, basically you mean it's alive and it will reproduce. If there is to be fertility in the world again, and in Iraq and in the Middle East, there's got to be a lot more work and a lot different way of looking at life and at fertility. Otherwise, it will never, never come back. And that will be to our loss, not just to Iraq's loss. Satellite imagery, I can provide all of this to all of you if you want. I brought the materials down. Over 10 years' time, showing the engineering drains that were put by Saddam's regime that are still not removed. No matter what anyone tells you about the sincerity of restoration, as long as those drainage canals remain there, there will never be a chance. They will always say, oh, we're so sorry, we're short on water. Those canals are short-circuiting the rivers and the tributaries directly to the Persian Gulf. Not only is it draining the marshes continually, it's a waste of fresh water. Once that water goes to the Gulf, it's gone. That's fresh water. All of that water needs to be captured and recycled and recirculated. They're engineers, not just Azam and others, that could capture that water and put it back. It doesn't have to go into the Gulf. But you can see, even as late as 2009, when the story came out, Small portions had water, but most of it was still dry. Okay, briefly, I'll show some clips and some photographs. Maybe there's some things that you haven't seen before. 1841, Mesopotamia and Assyria. These were books that were being published at the time. Middle 1800s, a painting, Marsh Arabs in the Covered Market. 1914, this was before the outbreak of World War I. Are you able to see these?
Yeah.
Okay. Photography, reed huts on the Euphrates near Karbala, National Geographics. This is one of the little known articles because it goes back so far. Brick making. Not only were there reed houses, but there were bricks from the clay. Water buffalo. This is a terrific picture because it basically encapsulates the elements of the human and natural ecosystem. The reeds, the people, the canoes, the water buffaloes. In the middle 1930s, anthropologists from Chicago went to Iraq to study the race of people living there. Separate from that, they took pictures of the environment and the way the people lived. So I gathered these together. Some of these are a wonderful collection at Harvard at Peabody Museum. Some of them are online. Others are in the original monographs from the 1930s Henry Field studies. This is where they get these notions, oh, these people have lived the same way for years and years and years. Unfortunately, they're not detailed enough in terms of describing the ways that modernization and other things came in and the ways that people were able to adapt to changing situations, not just the water, but to tourists and to anthropologists and to others coming in. But the documentation here seldom is gathered in one place. It's something that could be brought to the center if you wanted to do something. I'd be willing to help with that. These are from additional ones from the monographs. And then 1943, the War Department handbook for soldiers going into Iraq. Iraq was formerly called Mesopotamia. Its history goes back a tidy 5,000 years. By tradition, the Garden of Eden was located in this region. It's certainly one of the oldest settled regions in the world. Here it was that the ancient cities of Babylon and Nineveh flourished in Bible times. You will very likely see their ruins. Okay, again, the emphasis on, oh, that's over and done with. 1958, this is, y'all may be more familiar with this from National Geographics. This was a more modern times when color photography started to be published. And compared to 1914, it doesn't look like much change. Building the same way, living the same way, no chairs. And then captured document about 1989. Well, this would have been after the, let's see, after Kuwait. This might have been 92. The document from 1989 was Saddam's regime for destroying the marshes and the people there. And it said, for instance, strategic security operations such as poisoning, explosions, and burning of houses must be conducted against the subversives in the marsh area. The joint committees that have been formed to track down deserters and evaders of military service must intensify. When I read through this is almost biblical as well. As well as the lifestyle hasn't changed, I'm sure that there were directives like this that go way back in history, not just in the Middle East, probably. This is an indication of a certain personality and a certain kind of governance and a certain value on human life that it just comes out in an accentuated form because tonight we're talking about southern Iraq. But you see this over and over and over again, and it must be exposed and challenged if there's any hope at all for the subject of what we might call environmental restoration and people being able to return to a homeland. There's the handwritten. And yet we allowed this to happen. And I put a series, these are not easy to find, I put a series, space shuttle photographs of the region starting 1985. These are not satellite pictures. These are space shuttle. Astronauts were there. Human beings were looking down on this for almost 20 years. Watching this happen, the draining and the fires. There's a levee that shows that one area still dry, the other area still has water. This doesn't give you an indication of the depth of the water, which is another misleading aspect of rosy stories when you hear about restoring the marshes. Some of the marshes were quite deep. When you see them show up dark on photographs, they could only be a few inches deep. 93, this was after the first Gulf War. There's the huge drain that's still there, draining the fresh water from the Tigris and the Euphrates and the distributaries between them. 1994, fires clearly visible, yet we did nothing. And when there was a no-fly zone over it after the first Gulf War, we still did nothing. The CIA, wonderful maps. Fires, burning. Now, my story starts here. I won't go into it right now. My story starts in the early 1990s with Rand Rahim, Yusuf Akhoy from the Akhoy Foundation, and the others that were early documenters of this. And in many ways it changed my career and my concentration and my approach and reason for putting the environmental and the humanitarian together. At some time I could go in, but I can leave some of this for y'all and you can use it for reference. But I think at the moment I'd like to, stop and however you'd like to maybe conduct a discussion, maybe people can add some things and say where they're from, and maybe at some point I could get a list of who attended and so on.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Leiderman, for this wonderful lecture. In fact, I have a question before taking the questions from the audience. According to my knowledge, that the Iraqi government, in fact, assigned a minister is called Hassan al-Sari,
yes,
who supervised the process of restoring the life in marshes and to recover that with water. How much time do you think, as a subject matter expert, do we need in order to what we call restore life or to recover all the marshes with water? Because I know that's one of the biggest marshes which is called Al-Hammar,
yeah,
which is the largest.
Yeah.
Does it also still what we call, say, covered with water, or it needs more water, or?
Yes.
So
part of the process has started with since the American reinvasions in 2003. A small portion started without much human activity, much human engineering, just breaking the dikes down. But this would take, I believe, and I've been asking for at least a 20-year plan that wouldn't vary at all. A plan of commitment, a plan of drawing lines around the region that was once where people lived, where the villages can be shown that there were villages there, and to protect that against all other kinds of threats. And with thousands and thousands of people working, I have no idea how many people are actually on a payroll for doing anything about southern Iraq and the marshlands. I would guess it's probably in the hundreds, if that. This is not an earnest plan yet. I'm probably not the person to make a charge like that, because not being Iraqi, not having a pile of money, not having the equipment that Saddam had to take it apart. But if there were other people that had that influence and could make an assertion that if there was 20 years of protective custody of that area, that thousands of people from all over the world would work on this. They're Japanese, I don't know what their motivations are. Italians, I don't know what their but they put money and time and effort and high-value scientists under deadly conditions. They have it's coming from some other plane, this dedication to saving this particular part of the earth. 20 years, I would sign on for another 20 years to help in some way. But there's got to be a commitment. Now, the first thing that happened when the United States went back to Iraq is that they created, out of Ministry of Irrigation, they created a Ministry of Water Resources. That was a good thing. It changed the frame. More of that needs to happen, but I don't know how it works in practice. What I do know, and I have documents later in the slides, that marshlands restoration is being redefined as land reclamation by the Ministry of Water Resources. Huge contracts, the way I read it, huge contracts are being let for more drainage, more canals, and the creation of dry farmland for growing like corn and soybeans. Somebody may like to correct me about this, but the documents and the contracts are on the internet. They've done a wonderful job of reaching out to the whole world for talent, but I don't think they're doing a restoration job, they're doing a land development job. There still needs to be an advocate to put protective custody around that area, the same as we would do around any other place that we really cared for, because it'll take some time.
It means that Iraq alone can't do the job well because it's out of its control. And also it needs political efforts in order to pressure the neighboring countries, especially Turkey, because you know that it has built a lot of dams on Tigris and Euphrates.
Yeah, yeah. The water, it's purely engineering. There's more water within reach of the marshlands than they would ever need. The water is in the Persian Gulf. That water can be made into fresh water sufficient to circulate in the marshlands and to recirculate and to be recleaned. And then you will only have to make up water to add what's missing. The marshlands, this is me talking, nobody has ever wanted to do it. The marshlands could have its own independent freshwater supply with supplement from the Persian Gulf. They could tell the Turks, do what you want. They could tell the Syrians, do what you want, because of the proximity of the Persian Gulf and the increasing technology of taking salt out of the ocean water, and the value of oil that's sold by Iraq and available to Iraq to sell. There's the money, the technology. The only thing that's missing is the willingness. And if you don't have that, all the knowledge in the world and all the resources won't complete it. But that's what I would do if it was in my hands.
Now, that's the question. In fact, how can we make use of this water for Basra? Because you know Basra is still, in fact, suffering from the salty water. So is there any idea or that we can benefit from that water that goes to the marshes?
Historically, when the water falls, it falls upstream. And people have been able to maintain the quality of that water over like 100 miles. What is preventing that water from going through and still being able to be used by Basra? I really don't know. Basra is about 2 million people now, right?
More.
And it's going to be growing. 2 million people, 50 gallons a day per person. So it's a huge amount of water that's needed. I don't know what the total volume in the marshes was, but we all know that that water is moving to the Persian Gulf. So every gallon, every cubic meter that leaves the marshes, even if it was full, could also be used for water. So why is Basra short of water?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Leiderman, for this wonderful and helpful lecture. Thank you. The Iraqi Cultural Center, in fact, used to offer a gift for its guests for their wonderful words.
Oh, gee, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, that's wonderful. So there's still some time on this clock. Good.
You work around the clock.
I need the time. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. When we scheduled this a couple of months ago, I started working on a presentation that I thought would be interesting. There's an old principle called the Peter Principle that says no matter how much time you have for something, you will fill it up. So I've been working on this presentation ever since we scheduled the meeting. And I just finished this afternoon, polished it up, trying to see if no matter who attended tonight, that I could maybe give them something new and also be like refresh their minds about a story that a lot of people have forgotten.
حضرت اليوم إلى هذا المركز العراقي، المركز الثقافي العراقي في العاصمة للحضور حفل أو محاضرة حول الأهوار ومشروع إنعاش الأهوار في جنوب العراق. وهذا الموضوع في الحقيقة هو أثار انتباهي وشدني، لأنه أنا كنت أحد من العاملين في هذا المشروع في جامعة البصرة وفي مركز علوم البحار بقيادة الدكتور مالك حسن. وفي الحقيقة كنت متأمل أنه يكون شيء أكثر وأكثر حول هذا المشروع، ونتمنى أنه يكون هناك يعني مناسبات أخرى ممكن أن تشجع وتدفع نحو إعادة إنعاش الأهوار، لأنها مكان ومنطقة تاريخية تشمل كل العراقيين وممكن أن تمثل وحدة العراقيين أكثر.
واحدة من المحاضرات أو الإيفنتات اللي يقوم بها المركز الثقافي العراقي في واشنطن هي محاضرة أو لكتشر عن الأهوار في العراق، في موضوع جدا شيق كان من قبل الدكتور ليدرمان، وهو شخص متخصص بهذا المجال، قضى سنوات أكثر من 4 عقود في دراسة شؤون الأهوار بالعراق، وعنده وثائق وأفلام موثقة لدى أحد الجامعات في كاليفورنيا، ويعتبر أحد المصادر الموجودة في الولايات المتحدة لدراسة الأهوار. وعنده أيضا مشاريع كلش اقتصادية ومجدية بالنسبة للعراق، في حالة استفادت منها الحكومة العراقية في إنعاش الأهوار من جديد دون تكاليف كبيرة جدا، من خلال تدوير المياه اللي تصب في الخليج العربي. كانت محاضرة بالإنجليزية شيقة جدا، ونخبة من الجمهور حضرها، الأمريكان والعراقيين. صار تفاعل جدا شيق ولطيف بالمحاضرة، أغنى هذا البرزنتيشن الرائع اللي قدمه، وممكن اعتمادها فد شيء ممكن الرجوع إليه عند الحاجة، بعد ما قدم صور ووثائق ودوكيومنتات مصورة من قبل ناسا ومن قبل جهات أمريكية أخرى للأهوار على مراحل الدرين، التجفيف من سنوات الخمسينات إلى السبعينات إلى الحرب العراقية الإيرانية وما تلا ذلك. فكانت يعني في التاريخ مؤرشف موثق بالوثائق التاريخية اللي موجودة. أنا أشك أنه العراقيين أو الحكومة مالتنا أو الجهات المختصة بالبيئة أو الووتر ريسورسز، المصادر المائية اللي بالعراق العفو، ما عندهم هاي، ممكن الاستفادة من عندها. شيء واحد اللي ممكن نعول عليه، حبذا لو الجهات المعنية العراقية اللي تشوف هاي البرزنتيشن وهاي المعلومات ممكن أنه تستفيد من هذا الشخص كثروة ممكن يؤدي إلى تطوير المصادر المياه العراقية اللي عندنا، بما يصب لمصلحة الوطن بخير. ونأمل أنه نستضيفه في جلسة أخرى قادمة تكون أكثر تحضيرا لما لها أهمية، واستمتع الجمهور بها وأغنانا بمعلومات أخرى. وأيضا الجمهور تفاعل وقدموا قسم من المعلومات اللي هم أصلا عراقيين عايشين بالبصرة أو غيرها. وهذا رسالة المركز الثقافي العراقي في إيصال مثل هكذا معلومات للجمهور الأمريكي اللي كثير منهم استمتعوا، أبدونا وراء الإيفنت استمتاعهم، وحبذا لو تتكرر هذا.